morning. I picked out enough of that. I think you must have read our bios. So thanks for doing that. And thank you, Judy and Jin and all the rest of the technical team this morning for being here and making things happen. As Yo-Yo said, I'm Robin Parsons. Our company is Parsons Dialogue, and it's kind of fun to be here. Jin and I talked about what should we talk about today, a week and a half ago. And she said to me, well, what are you doing? What kind of stuff are you working on? I said, wow, we do a lot of stuff in multi-stakeholder and we really like it. So we said, well, let's talk about that. So I invited my business partner, Dave, here to join me in this conversation, and he's graciously gotten up as early as he's gotten up to be here. And so we're going to talk to you about our experiences. We've got, a little bit of kind of theory, if you will, around multi-stakeholder, but we've also got our own experiences, and that's what we'll talk about. We'll tell you some stories about what we've been doing and what it's been like. Parsons Dialogue is, we consider it a boutique consulting firm, which means we don't do everything, but we focus on large group dialogue. We focus on strategic planning, of course, the multi-stakeholder engagement work, and conflict resolution. And sadly, we're doing more conflict resolution right now, but that seems to be where we're at. I started my company as a solo practitioner in 2014, and then Dave joined me in 2020, and we became Parsons Dialogue. We rebranded into something different. So maybe, Dave, I'll turn it over to you and you can give a little more background about yourself.
Yeah, sure, Robin. So first of all, thank you to the organizers this morning for hosting this event and for giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of our work. So as Robin told you, I'm an associate with Parsons Dialogue, and I've had the privilege of working with Robin since probably about, I think, a regular basis since 2014. Our skill sets are a little bit different. Robin's focus is really on facilitation and strategy and brings a broad and deep knowledge of a range of facilitation techniques. I focus on a range of different skills, including facilitation, conflict resolution, particularly large group conflict resolution, and public engagement as well. So speaking to members of the public and engaging them in public processes. Robin, is there anything else you'd like me to add? I was going to ask her, are we going to share any of the slides?
Yeah, I'll thank you. I'll share those in just a moment. What I did just want to say is the kind of clients we work with. We work across all sectors. Like, we don't have one sector that we play in. We work public sector, so municipalities. We're doing lots of work in that space right now. Policing organizations, a little work there. We work in not-for-profit sector, so the social services. We've worked with housing, homelessness, mental health, seniors housing, so lots of non-for-profit work. And then we also work in the private sector, so we've worked with lots of resource companies as well. Some of the non-for-profit work we're doing is in environmental space as well. So we kind of see all parts of, really all parts of society with the kind of work we're doing, which I think is what makes things really interesting, because no two conversations are the same. Yeah, and First Nations. We've been doing a lot of work with First Nations in Canada as well. So let me share screen here. I'll share some slides.
And thank you for covering that, Robin. I realized I wasn't reading the speaking notes at the bottom of the slide.
I didn't expect you to. Don't worry about it. Okay, where did everybody go? There we go. Okay. All right. So we've done our introduction. So let's just jump in here. So let me jump to this first slide here, because I feel like this quote makes the case for facilitation. It's kind of in a nutshell why facilitation matters, why asking good questions matter, and having good process matters. The world is becoming more technologically complex, interdependent, and culturally diverse, which makes building relationships more and more necessary to get things accomplished, and at the same time more difficult. This is from an author by the name of Edgar Schein. And as Dave and I started conversations about clients, probably in about 2017. And we were talking about what's important to clients, what problems are they struggling with, how do we help them, what value do we bring? And so those were the kinds of conversations we were having. And I think Dave introduced me to Edgar Schein's book, Humble Inquiry. And this quote, I think, is on page 1. And it just really connected for us. This was kind of the driving principle for us of why we do what we do. And so as a result of this, so we started this conversations in 2017. In 2020, we actually came together more formally inside of Parsons Dialogue. And our practice has grown over time, in part because of this complementary set of skill sets that Dave and I have. As he says, we don't necessarily do the same things or have the same strengths. And that's been a real bonus for us. So we can take on more complicated work. And I think this is a part of why we found ourselves in the multi-stakeholder space, because it is more complicated and it does require a broader set of skills. Dave, would you add anything to that?
No, I wouldn't. That was great. Thanks.
Okay. So a definition, what is multi-stakeholder engagement? It's when a diverse group of organizations are asked to collaborate on specific challenges or exploit an opportunity in a way that achieves greater impact than what they could do alone. Typically, what's happening is you've got different parts of a system working together to bridge a system. And so they're working together to find a way to solve a problem inside their system. They need each other to be able to bridge that system. And they're often working towards a specific kind of aspiration. There's something that they're trying to achieve. And there's nothing new about multi-stakeholder engagements. They occur everywhere, all over the world, all the time. You may have been a part of one yourself. And if something's coming up for you, please comment in the chat box, or if you've got questions, please throw those into the chat box. We'd like this to be fairly interactive. So we'd love to hear what's on your mind as we're talking through these concepts. I was doing a bit of research on multi-stakeholder, and what I discovered is an awful lot of the documentation, the articles, the books, they're coming out of the United Nations. And of course, which in and of itself is a massive multi-stakeholder engagement. And they're coming with a big focus on climate topics or environmental topics, which is not really a surprise. That is a great example of a system where we have to work in partnership with other entities. And I'm just curious if anybody in the chat box, is anybody right now working on a multi-stakeholder? Are you working inside of one as a participant, or are you working with one as a facilitator or supporting anyone? And if you pop any of your responses in the chat, I'd love to know. We're going to share with you some of our experiences. We've got a couple of examples. We've got one that's quite new that we're just jumping into, and we've got one that we've worked with for quite a while. Heaven, you're working as a facilitator with one? Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Let me go to my next slide. So who participates in a multi-stakeholder engagement? And really there's 3 main poles that we can draw on. So there's we have representatives from, I'll call it civil society, so community, not-for-profit sectors. That's people affected, or that might be NGOs working on a particular piece of a problem. Then we have the private sector. We often have industry. So in the case of one of ours, we have industry as a key stakeholder and a key partner in the collaboration. And then often there's government. And it could be multiple levels of government. It could be a regulatory body. It could be municipal, in Canada, municipal or provincial or federal. So it can be multiple levels of government involved. And sometimes even across government is its own form of multi-stakeholder engagement, where you've got different entities within government coming in. What's important about them is that they are working together as equals. So they are there kind of in a balanced state of power with equal stake and equal voice. And they're contributing to a long-term engagement. They're there for a longer commitment. It's not typically in and out. It's typically we're here until we get something done. I see Dave Strong on this call, and I know that Dave's been working on stuff like that too. So I think he's been all over the place doing stuff like that. But importantly, they are committed to achieving a common goal. So that's really the driver for a multi-stakeholder engagement. Did I miss anything, Dave?
No, no.
Okay. So here's an example. And Dave, I'll let you talk to this one because I think this is familiar
Yes.
for you.
Yeah, you bet. So I wanted to pick an example to get us started that might resonate in a China context. This is not a project that we're working on, but this is an ongoing project in our in Western Canada at the moment. So the Columbia Basin is a river network that spans the western province of Canada, British Columbia. And it's critical. It's a critical source of water. It's a critical source of electricity and other things in this region. And every few years, Canada and the United States renegotiate an agreement for the sharing of this water and for how this network of rivers is administered. Prior to the negotiations, of course, there's lots of different groups that have interests in how this network of rivers is managed, and so there are citizens who are interested, certainly towns and local governments, indigenous nations, governmental organizations, and local utilities all have an interest in how this river basin is administered. And so the Columbia Basin Regional Advisory Committee is a multi-stakeholder group that was initiated by the government of BC and the government of Canada to look after the interests of all of these groups, particularly as Canada prepares for negotiations with the United States. And so for some of you, I hope this will resonate, of course, because China is of course, a country of rivers. Robin, I'll get you to go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about a project that we're working on right now. So Robin and I are also privileged to be working with a number of agencies, including the Calgary Police Service in our home city of Calgary in Alberta. It's a new project that we're working on, and it's meant to be a collaboration between municipal police, health, and social services. One of the issues that we're facing in our city right now is responding to people who are struggling with mental health issues or to drug addiction issues. And what we're realizing is that a police response isn't always the most appropriate when someone is suffering a mental health crisis or suffering an issue related to drugs. So typically, policing provides two options. That's either being arrested and going to jail or being hospitalized. So if you've committed a crime, certainly you'll be incarcerated or taken to jail. If you're unwell or if you're hurt, hospital is your first option. What our police service and what social service agencies are discovering here is that this is not a solution that's working. There are often situations where there's more nuance needed. And in fact, social service agencies can provide services to individuals that are much more appropriate. So the police service and other agencies like our Distress Center, Alberta Health Services, and the Center for Suicide Prevention have established new services like our 211 support lines, in which there are both emergency responders and trained social service professionals to help individuals who are in crisis. And now we're working with this team of organizations to figure out how they might work together on other initiatives. Certainly, the theme that I think is common amongst multi-stakeholder engagement projects like this is that, first of all, it involves a diverse range of organizations. And second of all of these organizations are looking for significantly different outcomes, significant changes to the system. well, we're going to talk about some other ones, but I want you to keep this Calgary Police Service project in mind as we talk later. Robin, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, this one's fun. We actually start this one next week. So Dave and I are just trying to figure out how we work with them next week. So this is a fun one. This one here, Wood Buffalo Environmental Association. This is one we've worked with for a couple of years now. We first met them when we were doing some strategic planning for them. And then they came to us and said, hey, we have this thing we want to do. Can you help us? So Wood Buffalo Environmental Association is a multi-stakeholder organization. There, and I want to, I'm going to just set this up for a minute, so bear with me. They monitor air quality in Northern Alberta. Now, in Northern Alberta, that's where the majority of oil and gas production takes place in Canada. And so when an organization goes in to get permission to extract the resource, there are a number of regulatory requirements that they must adhere to. One of which is to monitor air quality in the region for which they're operating. So Wood Buffalo Environmental Association, we'll call them WBEA, W-B-E-A. WBEA has been formed as a non-for-profit organization whose membership is industry and the local Indigenous communities, because Northern Alberta is primarily, or has many, many Indigenous communities. And so their membership decides what they do. The entire initiative is funded by the province of Alberta, but the funding comes from industry. So industry pays fees to the province each year for their regulatory obligations. And then those fees are funneled into organizations like WBEA for the purposes of monitoring the environment. What WBEA does is they collect a lot of data. They run monitoring stations, both their own government monitoring stations and industry monitoring stations. They collect a bunch of data and they make that data publicly available. This particular group is a very highly trusted multi-stakeholder organization because they deeply understand the values of multi-stakeholder and they live those values. And to be honest, they were delightful to work with because they live their values so overtly. And what they asked us to do is help them with a network assessment. So periodically, they take a look at, is our network doing what it's supposed to do? Does it answer the questions we want it to answer? Does it deliver against its objectives? And so they invited us in to help them with this assessment of their network. So we knew it would take some time, and it did. It took 18 months. We were in 9 different meetings with them. We had more than 100 hours of meeting time. And somewhere between 17 and 21 people participated in every meeting. And so the members of that network assessment process included industry that operates in the region. It included the Alberta Energy Regulator. It included Alberta Environment and Parks, so another part of the provincial government. It included the federal government, what do we call it? So Environmental and Climate Change Canada. It involved local Indigenous communities. The WBEA staff were involved and their science advisors. So we had a lot of voices in that room in this process. So we're going to talk about this more as I outline other aspects of what it is to be multi-stakeholder. We'll come back to these 2 examples. So let me go to my next slide here. So just a little bit of kind of theory here. So there's multiple forms of multi-stakeholder, and they look different depending on where they are on this continuum. So really the simplest format is what I would call, or what is called here, a multi-stakeholder dialogue. And in a dialogue, often they can be singular events, or maybe it's a recurring annual event. And they emphasize consultation, bringing together, sharing information, perhaps around a specific issue or topic. Their goal is often to raise awareness or to get feedback. And an example of an organization that we worked with, I think it was last fall, we worked with a hospitality association in Banff, which is close to Calgary, our ski area, and they're really struggling to get enough labor to run all of the various hospitality businesses. And so they pulled that community together to talk about what can we do about this. So that was kind of a one-off event. A multi-stakeholder platform is probably something that stays in place for a longer period of time. They might pull together their stakeholders a few times a year. They're emphasizing the consultation process. There's an organization in Calgary called the Calgary Homeless Foundation, and they bring together all of the organizations that they fund periodically to share updates, regulatory changes in the industry, or to gather input for budget submissions, and so, or to gather input for a lobby effort. So in terms of, asking the government for something they want. And so that is what we would call a platform. They're there, they gather periodically, mostly to collect information from each other. Multi-stakeholder initiative, I think of it more as a bigger project. It's coming together to get something done. It generally has a specific purpose. It generally has clear aims or objectives for some kind of a collaborative change, and working towards achieving some kind of a measurable outcome. I don't know how much you remember this, Dave, but we worked with a municipality in southern Alberta, and they were really being hit hard by the opioid crisis. They were having just a lot of stuff go on in their community. The community was frustrated, business was frustrated, and so the government there, the city, pulled together a multi-stakeholder group. It was business, it was social services, it was health, policing, to try and see if they could come together on some solutions for how they might tackle what was a very complicated problem. And so they were coming together for a period of time. We worked with them for several months, and then that group continued on after our involvement. I don't know, Dave, do you still have shivers about that one? I remember it being very hot in the summer and Dave working from his backyard office and melting back there.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah. Our would be a the network assessment group, I would say, was a multi-stakeholder initiative and fell under that grouping. And then multi-stakeholder partnership, I think, is what the group we're working with next week, our city police, I think I would throw it into that bucket. Usually fewer partners, but with a very clear outcome and expectations. Often there's a contractual relationship. There will be some kind of document agreement signed. There may be budget sharing. And so they're coming together to form kind of an entity to do something. And they're a much more formalized structure. Dave, would you add anything to those definitions or anything I missed?
No, other than just to add that the Columbia River Basin example is probably best seen as either an initiative or a partnership. And I think the other thing that's worth considering is that a single a program may actually shift from dialogues to a platform, to an initiative, to a partnership, depending on the complexity of the situation. So, for example, a group of organizations may start with a set of dialogues, but actually may progress to either being an initiative or a partnership, depending on what's discussed and agreed to during the process.
Yeah, that's a great point. They certainly are evolvable. Yeah, thank you for that. So this slide is a lot of overlap to the last one, but I think the point I wanted to make on this one is that there's a continuum here and the formalization increases. And so as you move from sort of a looser networking type of organization to, roundtable conversations, to some kind of a project, to some kind of a partnership, the formalization increases, probably the complexity increases, and the duration of the initiative increases. It becomes, and they're typically coming together because it's more complex. It takes focused effort because it needs a sustainable entity to work on it. Okay, so let's talk about why they are important. We, as I said in the opening, we really like multi-stakeholder. We think they're super important. And they're important because they are capable of tackling complexity. It's very hard for one entity to tackle the complexity of the system that it operates in. And so the multi-stakeholder collaboration is able to, with the various perspectives, by bringing all these diverse perspectives together, they are able to tackle complexity because you have all parts of the system represented. And so that's quite important. You can't see the system if you can't see all of the parts of the system, and you can't see the parts of the system if you don't have all of the perspectives in the room. The other thing that makes them important is they have the potential to reduce conflict. And in some ways that's paradoxical because sometimes they come together because there's conflict. But by bringing all these perspectives together and developing this deep understanding of where everyone comes from, it really reduces the possibility and the potential for conflict. And then when these folks who've been participating in the multi-stakeholder, when they go back into their systems, they're able to champion whatever solutions are needed as well. And so they're able to go back into their system and prevent conflict from bubbling up as well, because they can bring an informed multi-dimensional perspective to the situation. And importantly, and I think I've said this, they tackle big changes at the system level. Anything to add, Dave? What did I miss?
Other than to say that I think, as we see more and more complex situations, occur in society, that we can expect to be involved more and more in multi-stakeholder facilitation. So, I think the Calgary example with the Calgary Police Service is a great example. So the sorts of issues that we're seeing on the streets of Calgary are significantly more complicated than we might have seen 30 or 40 years ago. And they take a much more nuanced approach. And they just because of their very nature, they reach across organizations. So multi-stakeholder engagement is an important skill to master, because as societal problems get more complicated, it involves more agencies and organizations that may be very, very different in their essential nature, and need assistance participating in meaningful dialogue across those organizational cultures.
Yeah, that very different. We're discovering that with this organization, the police one that we're talking about, in that Dave asked them the question in one of our conversations. So how do you guys, do you guys meet on a regular basis? And they're like, well, we don't, but our police friends, they're always just doing. And we have to talk about it more. And so we see just very different styles of doing business between some of these partners. And that's what makes it harder for them to work together. Our police friends are so task oriented, they just get stuff done. And our social services folks are, they have more constraints because their funding is often tied to specific activities, and it takes more effort for them to be able to shift activities. So it's been fascinating to see these different styles at play. And that's a little bit of what makes them challenging. It's a sort of a good segue to the next slide. Multi-stakeholders are hard. They are hard to do well, and they frequently fall apart. And so what makes them so hard is that you do have these different styles, these different ways of being, these different ways of doing business, different values, different cultures. So you have different entities coming together, but being expected to work collaboratively on something. And that's not straightforward necessarily. With our Wood Buffalo Environmental Association, we had industry in the room, and we had government in the room, and we had community in the room. And, industry is kind of, give us the facts, we'll make a decision. Government is very reluctant to commit to any kind of a statement in a room or make any kind of definitive stance, because they have so many ways they have to validate that in their own organizations. And then our local communities, our Indigenous communities, they're like, well, but it's not right. It's for them, it's quite black and white. This just isn't right. And so bringing them to some level of understanding of each other and then to getting something done takes time. And so that's a really important factor in multi-stakeholder is you have to commit a lot of time. And you have to commit it up front and be prepared to commit to it up front. You know, as I mentioned with WBIA, we logged 100 hours of meeting time over 18 months. To the credit of WBIA, they said from the beginning, this is going to take a year. And it took us a year and a half. And they said, this is going to take time and we will go for as much time as it takes, and we will take as much time as it takes. And so they came into it with absolutely the right mindset to engage in that kind of a process. Our municipality in Southern Alberta said to us, we're going to do this in 3-hour meetings. And at the end of it, we're going to have a solution to this problem. And we went, that could be really hard. And it took much, much longer than that. What else did I want to say? Yes, that equitable approach. I think I just want to touch on that for a moment. As you're working with your multi-stakeholders, you have to find a way to work with them in a way that they see as equitable, where everybody is represented appropriately and fairly and have equivalent voice in the room. So those are all of the things that can make them hard. What did I miss, Dave? What would you add?
Yeah, I think just to give people a little bit of context, because I think often when we talk to clients and sometimes when we talk to others in our profession, they're surprised actually at how much time some of these initiatives take. And I think, you know, for those on the webinar today, you know, I would ask you to think about situations in which you've started a new job or you've started working with a new group of people. And you know, think about the amount of time that you invest in building the relationships that you need in order to do your job effectively and efficiently. It's not something that you do in the first week or the first month of starting a new job. It often takes months and sometimes even years to form, to understand the organizational culture, to understand the expectations and responsibilities of other people, and to really figure out how to work together, how to create a great outcome together.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for those add-ons. Okay. So as facilitators, so you're the facilitator, you're in the midst of this, you've been asked to come in and work with this organization. And what you have to be prepared for is unpredictability. It will not be linear and it will not go the way you expect it to go all of the time. And each experience is unique. So the way you approach one multi-stakeholder engagement may not be the way you approach the next one. And it might not be the way you approach the one after that. And so what happens is, you know, each engagement is a stage in a process, and you have a hope for where that process is going, but there's no guarantee that it goes there at the pace you hope it will go, or as straightforward as you hope it will go. And so we're trying to help, you know, our multi-stakeholders navigate their system, to first understand it and then navigate it. And so sometimes you make great progress for a while, and then sometimes you get really stuck, and they get stuck on something that's hard. And so you expected to, you know, perhaps come up with the plan for the next 6 months, and you get stuck because actually we can't agree on the objective for the next 6 months because the system is changing rapidly. There's different things happening all over the place, and suddenly it's hard to decide. And because of that, then you have a lot of potential for conflict. So in the case of our city police project, the landscape is changing so quickly. When that collaboration was conceived of, let's call it a year ago, the focus was on mental health supports But affordable housing has exploded as an issue. And now suddenly it's like, oh no, this must also be about affordable housing. And so our multi-stakeholder group is being given many, many different requests out of the same process. And that becomes quite challenging for them to navigate. So then it's competing priorities in addition to different kinds of organizations trying to navigate this constantly shifting system. So these are the reasons that they are hard. We're designing literally yesterday and today for this engagement next week. And, you know, we've got an A plan, but I think we have a B plan and we'll probably have a C plan, because I think what's going to happen is we're going to unfold this. We're going to unfold this next week, and we're going to discover that what the assumptions that we're operating on based on the information our clients gave us might not be the right assumptions when we hear all the voices in the room at the same time. And so we're prepared for that likelihood that it's not going to be as straightforward as we thought it would be, and that it will change, and that we're going to have to adapt.
Yeah, and I think what I would add, Robin, is that I think sometimes as facilitators, particularly if we're working in the context of a 1 or a 2-day event, we often think about our process design as sort of a flow that we need to figure out. We figure out what we do at the start of day 1, and then, you know, we work through a sequence, a carefully designed sequence of activities that lead to some sort of completion or summit at the end of day 2. Multi-stakeholder facilitation is a lot different in that, because of the associated complexities and because of the working relationship or the lack of working relationship, we have to often take kind of a wait and see approach, which might be, you know, in the course even of a 2-day workshop, of saying, so let's do these 2 activities. Let's take a look at what the group tells us, and then let's make a decision to go. You know, we could go in different directions. Certainly redesign in the evenings is often a component of this, because we don't necessarily know where the process will take us. I think it also highlights some important things around the client relationship, which are, you know, often clients will come to us seeing facilitators as kind of a solution to, you know, conflicted meetings or challenging circumstances that will have, you know, a process that will simply roll out. And sometimes we have to spend more time communicating the unpredictability to clients, asking them to trust, you know, as we often say, trust the process that we employ, but also wait for the responses of the group before making decisions about what the next activity will be. And that's sometimes hard, given that clients often demand predictability.
I think of our Southern municipality and 3 meetings. And by the way, this was COVID, so there were 3 virtual meetings in 3 hours, and we're going to solve that complicated problem.
It's often, you know, Robin, I don't know if you remember working on, you know, the city charters for Edmonton and Calgary, but, you know, certainly our clients at the municipalities of the city of Edmonton and the city of Calgary fully expected that the engagement process was going to be, you know, very structured, and that we weren't going to wander away from that, when in fact it would have actually benefited more from sort of a multi-stakeholder approach, which would have been to, you know, perhaps present the proposal at hand, get people's reactions, and then decide what conversations need to be had, as opposed to, we're going to conduct this distinct set of workshops over a course of time.
Yeah, good point. I do remember that. I think a point that I'm going to make, and this is a facilitator stance, but we can only go as fast as our groups can go. And so you have to, I think, lean into that principle that we can only go where the groups are able to go. So with WABIA, we thought that assessment would be done in 9 to 12 months, and it took 18. And there's some reasons why it took it. There's some really good reasons why it took longer, and I'm going to jump into those next. So let me talk to you about that a little bit. So when we're working multi-stakeholder, we have to contend with the evolution of a group. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bruce Tuckman's model, the forming, storming, norming, performing model. And it is deeply not linear, especially when you're working with a multi-stakeholder group. So you bring a group of people together. You bring a group of people together and they have to learn to be a group. So they form, we bring them in and they form. And then those relationships within the group start to form and they shift. And so things happen inside of that group. The dynamics are constantly shifting. What's particularly challenging in multi-stakeholder is your members come and go. And so, the Tuckman model tells us that when the membership of the group changes, you go back to forming. And so if your membership changes all the time, you never get into that, get through storming, you never get into that norming and performing stage. And so your group is kind of stuttering. It starts and stops and starts and stops. And those are some of the things that are super challenging. With WABIA, we had core membership that was very stable. So we had about 10, 12 people that were very stable. They were there for every meeting, every time. But then we had a periphery of, 8 to 10 people that changed all the time. And so we would have our government representatives and they would be in for a while and then something would change and then we would have new government representatives and then something would change and we would have new government representatives, or we would have an industry member change out. And so there was one meeting, we were at meeting number 7, and we really thought that was the end of the process. We really believed, okay, we're going to finish this today. In fact, I had my closing activities all prepared because I was sure we were going to finish today. But what happened is we had 2 new members in the group. And they were members with strong perspectives and important perspectives. So I don't want to suggest in any way they were negative, but they were some really strong perspectives. And so what happened is we ended up reopening previous conversations. We reopened some previous positions, and we had to go more deeply into a couple of topics because A, we had to bring people up to speed, and B, we had to understand what their perspectives were. So we ended up going for 3 more meetings after that. What was really interesting, so the group went back, so meeting 7, the group went back to forming. Meetings 1 through 5 had been virtual and this group was coming together and they were forming, and it was clunky. Like, it was really clunky in the virtual context. And at the end of meeting 5, the group had officially hit the storming stage. And our client said, this isn't working. It's not working. We have to change something. And we made the decision to go face-to-face at that point. And this was a COVID summer. So we were still in the middle of COVID. This is 2021. And so it was a decision to go face-to-face. We then had 2 days together face-to-face, and it completely changed everything. And so we got them through the storming, we got them into norming. And I think one of the memorable quotes from that session was, oh, I used to be afraid of Cal, but I think he's a nice guy now, right? And so people knew each other personally, they had relationships, and they could see the positive intent of everybody in the room. And we hadn't necessarily been able to see that to that point. So then we get meeting 6, it goes really well, we're in the groove, things are happening. Meeting 7, we think we're gonna land this, and then we grind to a halt because the membership changed. So we go back to the beginning. Now, a good, strong group can navigate back to where they were quickly, which we did. By meeting kind of 8 and into meeting 9, the group was performing so well that they didn't want to quit until they had solved all the issues inside of the process. So they wanted to stay in it until they got this. They said, this is the time, this is the opportunity, we have the right people in the room, we need to finish this. And so we went through meeting number 9. So we went longer than we expected, but they also got a better outcome. So it was really neat to see this journey of our group. And of course, we as facilitators, we've kind of got this model loosely in our head. And so we're doing different activities at different stages of the life cycle with these groups to understand where they were. So in those early meetings, it was, who are you? And what do you do? And what are your roles and responsibilities? And what's your perspective? And as we got into the storming meetings, then we started doing things like fishbowl activities. Let's really understand your perspective. Let's really, understand why those things are important to you. When we were getting into the norming phase, we could do evaluations. We could do, here's a proposal, here's the options, here's our decision on that. And we could use tools to make their thinking transparent and also their decisions transparent. And so it was really, it was pretty cool, in hindsight, to sort of see the architecture of this. But while we're in it, being aware of where the group was at in their journey. And so this is the stance you have to have as facilitator inside of these processes, recognizing that there's a life cycle, a journey of a group happening in addition to a journey of a process. And sometimes those things will collide. What did I miss, Dave? What would you add?
I don't think I would add anything. I think maybe we'll jump into the conflict slide. How does that sound?
Sounds good. All right. Over to you.
So as I said at the beginning of this morning's webinar, my interest is particularly in conflicted groups. And first, I want to just acknowledge a remark in the comments. So, and I'll just read this aloud. Maybe sometimes we're not meant to solve a conflict directly. Instead, invite every stakeholder to face the reality in the conflict. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that remark, because multi-stakeholder engagement processes tend, in some cases, they tend to be convened because there is a difference of opinion or difference in views in how to solve a problem. And I think sometimes what we need to do is we, rather than mediate the conflict directly, which is not always easy, especially with groups, is to give time for people to begin to understand how their values and interests differ, or in some cases how they're the same. So going and looking at the slide, we talk about multi-stakeholder engagement being prone to conflict because participants think they hold different values and interests. So I think the Calgary Police Service example is a really good one, in the sense that we tend to have a lot of preconceptions about how the police service might deal with social problems. And so if you're a social services agency, you may demonstrate some bias or some concerns about the participation of police, because it's a completely different culture. It's a different organization. It's believed to hold different values and interests than you might, and you may have actually been in conflict with police organizations if you represent the social services sector. The thing that multi-stakeholder engagement facilitates is, if it's designed in a complete sense, is it does give participants time to create a better understanding of the complete system. So looking at different people's perspectives of what's going on. But I think more importantly, it also helps participants learn to listen to other people who they believe that they don't agree with, and take the time to understand each other's perspectives. I mean, ultimately, especially when you're working with very large groups, which multi-stakeholder engagements often involve, some level of disagreement will continue to exist, but participants will begin to understand that some level of disagreement is actually acceptable, that it's actually part of the process, and that rather than focusing on the disagreement, they begin to focus on the things that they do agree on, and potentially move those forward. I'll go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit, just a little bit about some conflict theory and where it sits within multi-stakeholder engagement. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of a so-called conflict iceberg, where in conversation or discussion, we often concentrate on the issues and where we disagree about what a potential solution or set of solutions might be in those issues. And really, more effective conflict resolution is about revealing the invisible aspects of the conflict. So that might be around personalities, it might be around organizational culture, it might be about the emotions that the participants hold, it might be hidden expectations, needs, desires, unresolved issues from the past. In the next slide, I'm going to concentrate primarily on shared interest. So I'm trained as an interest-based mediator and negotiator. And so our theory, our belief is that when people participate in a process to try and resolve a difference in opinion, they will start with their position. So the position might be that it's the police's job to arrest criminals and take ill people to the hospital. And that that is the correct thing to do because that's what the police have done for centuries. Social service organizations might argue that there's a role in, there are social causes for criminality, and that criminality is a symptom or an outcome of illness or addiction, and that the police actually shouldn't participate in serving people who are either suffering from addictions or mental health issues. So I'm using that as an illustration of very, very different positions or opposing positions. Underneath those will be interests. So interests are things that we value, perspectives that we bring to bear on the situation that reveal what's important to us. So, for example, if you're a police officer, law and societal order might be very important. But at the same time, the well-being, the care and well-being of the citizens that live in your community are also important to you. If you're a social service provider, or let's say a social worker, your interest might be the mental health and physical well-being of the citizens that you care for. But I mean, in those two examples, I think you're probably sensing that there's a common interest around the well-being of citizens, the care and protection of citizens so that they can live a fulfilling life in society. And that may be a common, my point in giving this example is that you may have two groups of people who appear to have very different positions, but they may in fact share common interests that they can work towards achieving some solutions for. Robin, is there anything that you would add there?
I'll just take it from a slightly different perspective in that I think what Dave's getting at when we talk about interests, deep underneath it, there's a set of values. And so for those of you in the AFP program, we talk about the importance of values, in image theory. And so we're really trying to uncover what are these values, because a value gives us more space to solve a problem in. And so we're trying to understand what is the bigger opportunity, the bigger frame in which we can solve a problem together. And so, that mediation approach that Dave's describing is really about uncovering what's important to you, what's really, really important to you, why is that important to you, so we can, and then talking about it in the context of a value so that we can find places to work together, to maneuver together. I'm just going to add another flavor here. It's because I like talking about it, but Dave introduced me to a book. I think, Dave, you introduced me to a book. So there's two books you've introduced me to I'm going to talk about. But this one was a book called High Conflict, and it's by a woman named Amanda Ripley. And so It's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic book on the architecture of entrenched conflict. But there's a couple of key points in there that are relevant to multi-stakeholders. So one of the things she says is a key principle is that people need to feel you understand them, even as they realize you disagree, before they will hear you. And so there's so much in that. So what we found ourselves doing in these engagements, was really trying to help people feel heard, to take the time for them to fully explain their positions, what's important to them, and then we would draw them out, what's important, what's the interest, so that we could deepen the understanding in the room of a situation. And so that was that's where Dave's mediation background is so valuable to our partnership, because he comes at conflict in a way that allows us to really activate, process, to uncover it in these multi-stakeholder engagements. The other thing to be aware of in multi-stakeholder engagements is there are characters called conflict entrepreneurs. They're people who love conflict and they benefit from conflict, and there's some gain for them of being in conflict. And so in your multi-stakeholder engagements, you really have to be aware of whether or not you've got one of those in your group. And if so, you have to figure out how to work with that. And a third point that I love from her book is that humiliation is the nuclear bomb of conflict. When someone perceives themselves to have been humiliated, you will have conflict. And so you're going to have to work your way through those things. So those principles have been really interesting for me to bring into the facilitation practices, because they're things we're thinking about now as we're looking at, wow, do we have a conflicted group here? Do we have a group that is in trouble, or are any of these factors potentially present when we start working with a multi-stakeholder group? We've had some groups of late that have been in deep conflict. I would say that these principles that I've just described could be seen in those conflicts. And I'm thinking particularly of our political party friends, Dave.
Yes. Robin, I've just had a note in the chat here, just asking to maybe move to a wrap up. I guess we're coming to the top of the hour. So maybe what we'll do is I'll just go to the principles, the 7 principles. We'll kind of maybe take a question after that. So a colleague of mine that I worked with in a different industry like to highlight things in terms of principles. And so in the way that this individual expressed it was to say, talk about principles in terms of whatever we do, we must. And so we'll leave you with 7 principles for multi-stakeholder engagement. So whatever we do, we must help our participants challenge our assumptions and preconceptions about each other. The second, whatever we do, we must recognize and relish diversity as an asset, not a problem to be solved. The third, whatever we do, we must give value to the many different contributions a partner brings to multi-stakeholder engagement. And fourth, we need to build skills in partnering and collaboration and collective leaderships amongst the participants in any sort of multi-stakeholder engagement process. Let's go to the next slide, Robin. And then our last 3 principles. So whatever we do, we must understand the systems and contexts our partners operate in. So number 6, always apply high standards, rigor, and accountability to your partnerships. This really speaks to the importance of seeking a common process that people are comfortable operating in. And then 7, invest in the process of engagement and create the conditions for efficiency, innovation, and sustainability. This speaks to sort of the commitments of time. So I've moved us quickly to a close per the request I received here in the chat. I think Yo-Yo, maybe we'll ask: Are there any questions from the folks that are on the call today?
Yes, I see a question in the chat. Sally is asking, what's your job or interest, and how your job and interest affects, when you facilitate in the multi-stakeholder group. I think if I understand correctly.
So I heard two questions. What is our job when we're in that facilitating multi-stakeholder, and what's our interest when we're facilitating multi-stakeholder?
Yeah, seems like, and how that affects your role or your, when you facilitate it.
Yeah. Dave, do you want to take a stab at that first? Or do you want me to run?
No, why don't you take a run at it first, Robin, and
Okay.
I'll add.
My job when we're doing multi-stakeholder is to, ultimately it's always for us to guide the group through process, but there's an awful lot of supporting our client that's important too. And so helping our client to understand how a process is unfolding, how we can see them in the process, and help guide them to what is the next appropriate step. And sometimes to reassure them that what's happening is normal. So we're very much, in that facilitator language, we're very much the guide, the pilot, the architect. I'm thinking of Beatrice Briggs' video. So we're very much in those roles. The interest we have, or the interest I'm holding when I'm in those roles, is really is that the group gets its best outcome. I want that group to get the outcome that they want. And so my interest is in them getting to the place that they want to get to and feeling accomplished and satisfied by their work.
Yeah, and I think I would add, I'm glad you went for first, because I think you and I often take distinct roles in how we work together. And I think what I'm often looking for is the sort of level of harmony within the group. So where is it in its capacity to understand? Where are the participants in their capacity to understand one another? And where are they in terms of their capacity to begin to work together? Because my interest is primarily in conflict, I'm always sort of thinking a lot about kind of levels of alignment and levels of readiness. And to Robin's point, the importance of coaching the client to understanding, because often they're sitting there with a deadline or a requirement to get something done. They're not always thinking about the time that it takes to ensure that the participants in the process are at a state of readiness to actually come to some solution or some conclusions.
Dave is always the one in our interviews with the client to say, so is there any open conflict? He will always ask that question.
Yeah, and I think the numbers of times that clients start off by saying, "Oh no, it's just fine," and then slowly over time, they begin to recognize where there are differences or where there are issues, and I'm always surprised at how many clients believe that simply calling a facilitator is all they need to do to suddenly make things start to go right. When in fact, actually, it's really up to the participants in the process, ultimately to make it a success.
Okay, great. There's another relevant comments about conflicts within the multi-stakeholder group, and saying that maybe sometimes instead of, they don't really mean to solve you may not mean to solve the conflicts directly, but maybe we're talking about or thinking about invite everyone around the table to face the reality in the conflicts. So in that way to, let people see.
Yeah, I think that is a great statement. It's true. I mean, that's kind of step one, is we all need to see the dimensions of this conflict and all the sides of the conflict. And so, we pull a tool from the Sam Kainer toolbox, but we love using a fishbowl for something like that.
Yeah, and I think, Robin, you made a really interesting point about the idea of a conflict entrepreneur, somebody who is more vested in starting a conflict as opposed to ending a conflict. And I think sometimes the power of these kinds of processes is to help those conflict entrepreneurs, you know, recognize that you know, promoting an open conflict, it doesn't, it rarely gets, it rarely creates an effective solution. And so sometimes we'll see people actually step back from that position or that approach.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robin and Dave. Well, this is such an interesting conversation. I hate to stop it, but because of the time, so I think we have to wrap it up. We don't really have time for other questions, but we do have a group, so people can ask questions in that group, and I'm sure Robin and Deb will have a chance to answer other questions in other channels. Okay, thank you very much.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, Dave Strong has one question.
Okay.
Dave says, could you speak a little more about how to create a conversation among equals with equitable approaches where there are power imbalances in the group? Perhaps authority to act rests with only one of the stakeholder groups as an example. You have a thought on that, Dave?
Yeah, I think a lot about power imbalance. And this is the start of it could be the start of a very long conversation. But I think one of the values of having at least some education in conflict resolution is looking at or hunching, because you know those the power imbalances that may be perceived or exist on the surface are rarely the power imbalances that are actually inside the system. And so I think, you know, helping participants to understand those things is important from the standpoint of helping those who perceive themselves to hold the power to understand, you know, whether they do or not, but also helping those who may feel powerless understand where they actually do hold power in relationships. So that's David, I got to tell you, that's a super complicated question, and I feel like I've just given you a really, really lame answer. So if at some point you want to follow up and talk about it further offline, I'm more than happy to do that.
And I think, Dave, that what I would add to that is, you know, leaning into our facilitation techniques, right? And I know you would be doing this, but you know, the small group work, the, you know, structured go-arounds, you know, individual thinking, individual writing. So I think I start to lean into a lot of those tools to deal with the power imbalance. But a key principle of multi-stakeholder is that everyone in the room has equivalent, you know, decision-making authority, right? That they have the equivalent capacity to participate and decide. And so the structure of the multi-stakeholder of who's in the room really matters. Like what I really like about the police one is that it's all the CEOs of the various partner organizations. So they're all equivalent power levels. With WABIA, every member has a vote, and so they all have equivalent power in the room. Now, WABIA themselves don't vote, but they're the organization that holds it. They don't vote, but everybody in the room had equivalent voting power. So those are some of the things that help and make a difference. And yes, power and authority is always a challenge.
Yeah, you know, I should have said this, I think, in my first answer, and that is there's a reason why people are sitting around the table. So, you know, if the power brokers are sitting around the table, it's because they don't have as much power as they're perceived to have. They've decided to be there because they need to be there, because they don't necessarily have the power to decide the solution without the input of the other people.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. It's and a lot of the stuff, you know, I've dealt with this as well. And Robin, of course, you know, using those techniques, and I find the ladder participation very helpful in this, framing up exactly where the goalposts are for a group, because sometimes you really are somebody outside in that group leaves, and they will actually decide, and they have another network that they have to talk to and engage before they actually act on it. So sometimes it gets messy, but I was poking around that sort of what you were getting at, Dave, about, inside, embedded within that group, the different types of power and what that might look like. And it is a deeper conversation, but perhaps one to follow us up on later is an area I'd love to explore.
Yeah, happy to. It's a complicated one, and I think you dive a lot into it in interest-based mediation.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I appreciate that.
Yes, we do have time actually for questions. My bad. I wrongly calculate the time. So
I have just a couple more slides to share if we have time, and if not, we can end here. So
now we can take a couple questions here.
I'm happy to take questions too.
Can I ask a question? In one of the PPT, you were talking about the eco status for different stakeholders around the table. Well, that might be a challenge sometimes in China, if, among the governments, corporates, and NGOs, if they don't really, how we can, they don't sometimes, as a fact, they don't really have the equal status of power around the table. So how, when we facilitate kind of situation, how can we?
I guess my response is, I mean, you're always within your system, right? So multi-stakeholder exists within a larger system. And so, what we had with WBIA is people coming into the room with intent to participate in good faith, treating each other as peers and equals. And when they leave the room, they go back into their systems. Well, the government system has more influence than, really more control than the industry, let's call it, or than the communities. And so what the goal is for those participants to have enough depth of understanding to be able to advocate back into their own systems and to champion back into their own systems. But you still, you have the system is a factor. So I would say it's really emphasizing the responsibility of the participants inside of the multi-stakeholder engagement for their obligation to the group, and then their responsibility when they go back into their systems. But it's not perfect.
I think it's worth adding to that going back to the Shine quote about increasing levels of complexity. Unfortunately, it's been a very long time since I've visited China, so I don't completely understand the current state. But I think as you look around the world and you look at the sorts of issues and the level of complexity associated with them, the traditional decision-making authorities are challenged to really come up with good solutions, right? And so as they're viewed, as they're seen as failing, I think you will see over time one of two things: either sort of a bolstering of positions, no, we're in charge and you'll do what we tell you, or an acknowledgement, very much like our police client, that we need to work with different stakeholders because they bring different views, different perceptions, and a level of innovation that you can't simply achieve if the deciding organization is just kind of a monoculture, right? So again, I don't understand the China context in sort of a modern sense. But I think you'll see amongst governed bodies that are really dedicated to finding great solutions, they're starting to reach out and they're starting to work with a wider range or a more diverse array of stakeholders in order to help them find good solutions.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience here in Zoom? Or I'm checking the audience online in the live streaming. We still got space for one more question.
And if we don't have another question, I'll just give you kind of the wrap up slide that we had in terms of tips for facilitating a multi-stakeholder. And so really, we've kind of got 5 points here. Plan to slow down. Don't rush the process, right? And counsel your client accordingly. Invest time in a thorough discovery of all perspectives before you bring the group together. So we usually do this kind of thing anyway, but just even a very fresh example, we're working with this police client and we've had a discovery session with our police. And then as we're digging into the preparation, I'm like, we don't understand enough, right? So I'm like, of course we should have done this. So then it's like, go back to talk to each of these partners. I need more perspective. I don't even have enough perspective to really do this well yet. So really invest that time for a thorough discovery of all the perspectives before you bring your groups together. It will help you when you bring them together. Take time to build perspective among the participants. So Dave and I joke that we have a 4P model for how we think about clients with 5 Ps. But we always say, the group needs to know why they're together, their purpose. They need to know what problem they're solving. They need to know what their plan is to solve it. And they need to have some practices for how they solve it. But through our multi-stakeholder work, we have discovered a 5th P, which we say is perspective. And we have to constantly be building and reinforcing perspective, constantly adding perspective into the room because things change, things shift. And so you have to always go back. What's going on? What's going on? What do people see? What do people understand? And so that perspective building never stops. And I think sometimes we think, oh, we do that once, we set the ground, we get all the information out once, but you have to do it constantly. Invite participants that will stay involved over the long run would be our 4th tip. And I would emphasize that to your client. And when your client is inviting people, that I would tell them to emphasize that, because that changing of the dynamic really does make it difficult to sustain your momentum when your membership changes. And then the 5th tip is stay close to your client or your sponsor and support them through the experience. If they're new to this, it'll feel really uncomfortable at times. It'll feel really like, oh my God, it's just blown up, right? In Sam Kainer language, you get into the groan zone and it's messy and it's unclear. And you really have to stay close to your client and support them that we will get through this, that there's a path forward, that this is normal, trust the bigger process, and support them that they're doing the right thing and highlight where you're having success in the process, so that they can be confident back into their system that they need to talk about this too. So those are some of our big, thanks, Darlene, we can do it. Those are sort of some of our big tips. I think, School of Hard Knocks kind of tips. Dave, would you add anything to that?
No, I wouldn't, Robin.
And I would say, trust your business partner.
Mm-hmm.
Dave and I just went through this yesterday. I'm like, okay, I don't know, I'm stuck. What would you do? Would you do it differently? And there's a lot of those kind of conversations that happen. So trust your colleagues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that's actually a question that I have for you guys. I'm curious, I know you and Dave always work together, but for a multi-stakeholder group, do you always try to invite another colleague to co-facilitate with you? And are there any tips or what, how you guys step into each other and support each other? What's the roles? How you divide, how you divide and coordinate at the same time in this kind of case?
Do you want to take it, Dave?
Yeah, maybe I'll speak to it, because I think that this is a practice from conflict resolution that I think that facilitators have yet to adopt, and I think it's actually quite critical. So to your point, yeah, we do work in concert frequently, and I think it depends on the assignment. So in a very practical sense, we did a lot of work together in COVID, because simply working in this medium, it's very difficult to facilitate and handle the technical aspects of the work. And that's kind of initially where we started. But as we had more conversations about it, we realized there's a lot of facilitators that work as individuals, practitioners, yet we're dedicated to a discipline that's about collaboration. So to me, at least, that created sort of some cognitive dissonance that didn't seem right. And certainly when we started touching a lot more multi-stakeholder work, we started to realize that the diverse perspectives or different views of a situation were actually enormously helpful in terms of design. So typically in our process, on more complicated assignments, we'll work as a set of partners through each step. So for example, when we sit and talk to clients and we're helping them to diagnose the situation and to arrive at a set of solutions for the engagement process, Robin and I will do that side by side because, of course, we'll hear different things in the conversation with the client. When it comes to design, again, we have different skill sets, so we'll introduce different skills and abilities, different techniques in the design of the process that we're using. And then I think in the facilitation piece, we try to go back and forth. So it depends on the assignments, and in some cases, I'm very happy to let Robin dive in and tackle a lot of the facilitation piece, where what I'll do is sometimes handle more of the sort of conflicted pieces or some of the small group work, particularly in some of the interviewing techniques that I like to use, in order just to give each other simply a break. And then, post-event, and this is probably, I think, where the value is the greatest, is reflecting post-event on the things that happened, to look at what took place and to figure out what our next step is really critical to our success. Because of course we see and we hear different things. And so in that debrief process, we arrive at a different set of conclusions as a partnership than we do as two individual practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you add to that, Robin?
No, I completely agree. And I'm always so grateful for a different perspective. I feel like I get trapped in my own head often. So having Dave weigh in on something or see it differently is so valuable for my own experience. So it's been a really great experience to be working this closely with somebody else.
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference. And I think, if you have colleagues who work in any form of structured mediation, so for example, with courts or what have you, if you're a facilitator and if you have the time to go and observe how mediators work in pairs, I think it's a really, really valuable experience.
I just noticed Heaven's asked a question. So what's the difference of working in a multi-stakeholder context and working in a single organization? And what abilities, knowledge does it take? So I think the difference really is complexity. With multi-stakeholder, you have very different entities coming together with different approaches, styles, values, so forth. In an organization, you'll have different cultures within an organization, but broadly, there's this uniting purpose of the organization. And in terms of a skill, I think you have to be more comfortable with the uncertainty that goes with complexity. When I first started getting into some of these more complicated engagements, I think I can't see my way through it. I must not be good enough. But in fact, that is to be expected, that you can't see your way through it. And you have to be comfortable that it will unfold and trust that you'll understand it as it unfolds. Whereas when I first started working this kind of stuff, I didn't have that confidence or that trust. So it's taken a bit of time to understand that actually this is normal, and it will become more clear as we'll get through this, and then it'll become more clear and it'll get through this. So I think that's just a maturity of time in the saddle.
Yeah, and I think multi-stakeholder demands that sort of maturity, right? I think sometimes we think that we can design our way all the way to the destination, and as opposed to thinking about it, like driving down a foggy road, right? We can only see the next sign. We can't necessarily see through the fog and what's around that curve and what's 5 miles down the road. I think the only thing that I would add to this, Robin, is that there are, I think to a lesser degree in a place like Canada, perhaps more in the United States, and certainly there's the population in China to support organizations that are absolutely huge. But when I think about some of the clients that we've had, like the city of Calgary, which is about 15,000 employees and is, probably one of our province's largest organizations, it's amazing how quickly things turn into multi-stakeholder engagement, because, in an organization that size, the leaders like to leave you with the impression that it has a single mission and that it's well unified and aligned. But the reality is that, when you have the planning department talking to the transportation department, talking to first responders, and then talking to the parks department, and, all of a sudden, these differences of culture and differences in opinion start to emerge.
You're welcome, Heaven. I don't know if that was a clear answer, but we talked a little bit.
Well, I think that's it then. Let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, Robin and Dave. I know that when we, started discussing this, today this presentation is so comprehensive. It's wonderful, and thank you for investing all of your time and energy and preparing and delivering this today. And you did review a lot of root cause of the challenges facing in the multi-stakeholder engagement situation, and also thank you for those very practical, concrete suggestions on how facilitator can actually facilitate and help improve that coordination. Thank you very much. And I'm gonna say a little about next month in Chinese. 所以感谢各位今天来参加直播的小伙伴，还有我们在 Zoom 会议室里的伙伴。下个月同一时间，就是我们11月月底的时候，11月24号晚上8点，我们还会有这个直播，就是11月份的直播。那么嘉宾是 Acta Bromley， 也是一位资深的引导师，也是我们 ICAA 的同事。那么他也是社区发展的专家，也是教育专家。我们下个月在月底的时候，我们还会有这个每个月的直播，欢迎大家继续参加。然后感谢各位今天来参加的小伙伴。好 ，OK， Thank you very much for everyone, for our guests and for the host and for our audience. And we will see you next month then. Anything you want to say, Robin?
Just thank you so much. It's been our pleasure. For Dave and I, doing this is an opportunity for us to talk through our philosophies, and we actually enjoy that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that very thorough analysis of this situation. That was really valuable.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, evening, whatever part of the day it is in your world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thank you to the technical team. Thank you guys for doing that. How did it go at your end?
I think we have over 500 audience on the WeChat.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that's a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, 569.
Good for you guys.
Okay.
Well done.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's great.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Nice to see you
Our
all
pleasure.
again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is
You
really
guys.
wonderful. Yeah, thanks.
All right.
After
Have a good
Anyway.
day.
Yeah, after editing, we will put this recording to the YouTube.
Oh,
ICAA.
okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.